The stories you are about to hear are real. They were not written for entertainment. They were not crafted by authors sitting safely at their desks, imagining monsters from the comfort of their homes. These are accounts from real people, survivors, witnesses, people who called the police, who filed reports, who woke up one morning living an ordinary life, and by nightfall, could never return to it. I want you to understand something before we begin. Horror, true horror, does not announce itself. It doesn't come with a soundtrack. It doesn't give you a warning. It slides into your life quietly, like a shadow moving across a wall when no one is walking nearby. Tonight, we have 5 stories, 5 accounts that were reported, investigated, documented. 5 stories that will make you reconsider the house you live in, the people you trust, and the sounds you hear at night, and tell yourself are nothing. My name doesn't matter. What matters is this. Every word you are about to hear is true. Let's begin. Story 1. The Man in the Walls, the unspeakable discovery of the Dorchester house. In the spring of 2011, a woman we will call Marie, to protect her identity at her own request, moved into a rented home in the suburbs of Cincinnati, Ohio. She was 34 years old, recently divorced, the mother of a 7-year-old boy named Caleb. She had chosen the house carefully. 3 bedrooms, a yard with a fence, a quiet street where the neighbors waved from their driveways and children rode bicycles until the streetlights came on. It was, by every visible measure, exactly the kind of house where nothing bad should ever happen. Marie later told investigators that the first few weeks were fine, normal, even. Caleb enrolled in school. She found a job at a dental office 20 minutes away. She unpacked boxes slowly, the way you do when you're starting over, carefully, deliberately, as if placing each object in its new spot is a small act of rebuilding yourself. She said the house felt good. She said it felt safe. The first thing she noticed, the first thing that she would later describe as wrong, but not wrong enough to worry about, was the temperature, not throughout the house, just in one room, the hallway closet. It was always cold, not the ambient chill of a poorly insulated wall, not the draft from a window left slightly open. This was a deep, consistent, almost damp cold that rolled out of the closet the moment you opened the door. Even in July, when the rest of the house was warm, she mentioned it to the landlord. He shrugged and said the house was old, said old houses did things like that. She believed him. The second thing she noticed, and this is where the story begins to shift, was the sounds. At first she thought it was the pipes. Anyone who has lived in an old house knows the sounds they make at night. The groaning of wood as temperatures change, the distant gurgle of water moving through old plumbing, the ticks and pops that seem to come from everywhere and nowhere. But this was different. This was rhythmic, a slow, deliberate sound, like something pressing against wood from the other side. Not banging, not violent, just pressure, steady pressure, like someone leaning into a wall. She told herself it was raccoons, that something had gotten into the space between the walls. She Googled pest control companies and made a note to call one in the morning. She didn't sleep well that night. 3 weeks later, Caleb came to her room at 2 in the morning. He was 7 years old, and even at 7, he was not a child who frightened easily. He had never been afraid of the dark, had never asked for a nightlight, had never crawled into her bed after a bad dream. But that night he was standing in her doorway, and even in the darkness she could see that his face was wrong. "Mom," he said, "the man in my wall is breathing again." Marie told him it was just the house making noise. She walked him back to his room. She checked his closet, checked under his bed. The ritual of reassurance that every parent knows. Nothing. She told him the sounds were pipes, that old houses talked. She tucked him in and sat on the edge of his bed until he fell asleep, and then, in the silence of his room, with her son breathing softly beside her, she heard it. A slow exhale. From inside the wall behind his headboard, she told herself it was the house. She told herself that for 11 more days. On the 38th day, she lived in that house. Marie came home from work to find the hallway closet open. She was certain she had not left it open. She was the only one with a key. Caleb was at school. No one else had been inside. She stood in the hallway for a long moment, looking at the open closet door, at the darkness inside it, at the small rectangle of black that seemed somehow deeper than it should have been. And then she stepped forward and looked inside. The closet was standard, a bar for hanging coats, a shelf above it, a few boxes she hadn't unpacked yet. But the back wall had a seam in it, a seam that had not been there before, or rather, a seam she had never noticed before, running vertically from floor to ceiling, just slightly off-center, the kind of seam you'd see on a door that had been wallpapered over. She called the landlord. He arrived the next afternoon with a flashlight and a crowbar, and when he pulled back the wallpapered section of the closet's back wall, what he found on the other side caused him to step backward and put his hand over his mouth. A passage, not a large one, perhaps 18 inches wide, running parallel to the interior of the house. A narrow channel between the outer wall and the interior walls of 3 rooms, including Caleb's bedroom. The passage had been sealed at some point, plastered over on the house side, wallpapered on the closet side. Not recently. The work looked old, decades old at least, but at the base of the passage, in the thin layer of dust that had accumulated over what appeared to be many years, there were footprints, heading inward, and no footprints heading back out. Police were called. The passage was investigated. It ran the length of the east side of the house, with small peepholes, later determined to have been drilled. Not original to the construction, positioned at strategic points. One overlooked the living room, one overlooked the master bedroom, and one, positioned at a height of approximately 4 feet from the ground, precisely the height of a child's headboard, overlooked Caleb's room. The police investigation determined that the passage had been accessed relatively recently, within the last 2 to 3 years, based on dust patterns and the condition of the peepholes. A search of the property revealed, beneath the back porch, a cache of items that had not been left by Marie, a sleeping bag, partially rolled, several empty food containers, a flashlight, and a notebook. The contents of the notebook were never publicly released. Marie was told what it contained by the detective assigned to her case. She has never spoken publicly about what she was told. She and Caleb left the house that same night and never returned. The individual responsible was never identified. No arrest was ever made. The house was later purchased by a couple who, according to local records, sold it again 18 months later. No reason was given for the sale. Marie still locks her closet doors at night, every closet, every night. And sometimes, she says, sometimes, when the house is very quiet and her son is asleep and there is nothing but silence, she still hears it, that slow, steady presser. E against the inside of a wall. Story 2. The Lake House. what came up from the water at Harrow's Cove. In the summer of 2017, 4 college students rented a lakeside cabin in rural Vermont for what they planned to be a week-long end-of-semester trip. Their names, as recorded in the subsequent police report, were Daniel, Priya, Zachary, and a young woman named Elise. They were all 21 or 22 years old. They were friends in the way that people are friends at that age. Easy. Unguarded, certain that nothing truly bad will ever happen to them. The cabin was booked through a vacation rental site. It had good reviews. Photos showed a wooden dock extending out into still, dark water, pine trees, a fire pit, a small rowboat tied to the dock. They arrived on a Friday evening in late June. The first 2 days were, by all accounts, ordinary. They swam in the lake. They cooked on the fire. They sat on the dock at night and watched the stars in the way that you can only see stars when you are far enough from any city that the sky becomes something else entirely. Zachary later told police that it was the most peaceful he had felt in years. He said that even then, even with everything that happened after, he still thinks about those first 2 days with something close to longing. On the 3rd day, Elise found the box. It was in the boathouse, a small wooden structure at the edge of the dock where the rowboat was stored when not in use. She had gone in to find oars and found instead, tucked behind a shelf in the back corner, a metal lockbox roughly the size of a shoebox. It was not locked. Inside were 2 items. The first was a collection of photographs, Polaroids, roughly 2 dozen of them, all taken on or near the lake, all taken based on the quality and aesthetic of the ages, sometime in the 1980s or early 1990s. They showed a family, a man, a woman, and 2 children, a boy and a girl, both appearing to be under 10 years old. They were smiling in some of the photographs, fishing, sitting on the dock, roasting marshmallows over a fire pit that appeared to be in the same location as the current one. A happy family, a normal vacation, the kind of photographs anyone might have, except in every single photograph, everyone, there was a figure in the background, standing at the tree line, at the edge of the dock. Once, in a photograph taken inside the cabin through a window, standing just outside in the yard, not close enough to identify clearly, not clearly enough to be certain it was the same person in each photo, but always present, always still, always facing toward the camera, toward the family, with a posture that somehow conveyed, even in the grainy ambiguity of old Polaroid film, that they were watching. The second item in the box was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. The ink was old enough to have faded to a brownish gray. The handwriting was small and neat and urgent. It read, and I'm going to read this to you exactly as it was recorded in the police report. If you find this, listen to me. Do not swim in the lake after dark. Do not go near the boathouse after sunset. Do not, under any circumstances, answer the door if something knocks after midnight. The thing that lives in the water is not an animal. It knows you are here. It has always known. We are leaving and we are not coming back. If you are smart, you will do the same. Do not wait to see it. Leave now. Leave now. Leave now. The phrase "leave now" had been written 3 times. The 3rd time, the pen had pressed hard enough to tear partially through the paper. They did not leave. Elise wanted to. Zachary thought it was a prank set up by the rental owner, some kind of local tradition to spook tourists. Daniel and Priya were somewhere in between, unsettled but willing to be convinced. They agreed to stay 1 more night. Just 1 more night. That night, around 11 p.m., Daniel went to the boathouse to retrieve a fishing rod he had left there earlier. He did not come back. After 15 minutes, Zachary went to look for him. He found Daniel standing at the end of the dock, just standing there, perfectly still, looking out at the water. "Hey," Zachary called. "You okay?" Daniel didn't answer. Zachary walked out onto the dock. He said the boards felt wrong under his feet. Slick. Even though it hadn't rained, he said the air smelled different out there. Over the water, he said it smelled like something low and cold and old, like the bottom of a well. He reached Daniel and put a hand on his shoulder. Daniel turned to look at him. And Zachary said, this is his exact quote from the police report, "His eyes were wrong, not the color, just wrong, like he was looking at me from somewhere far away, like he was looking at me through glass." Zachary grabbed Daniel by the arm and pulled him back toward the cabin. Daniel didn't resist. He walked with him, stumbling slightly, like someone coming out of a very deep sleep. They got inside. They locked the door. Elise made coffee and sat with Daniel until gradually, over the next hour or so, he seemed to come back to himself. He had no memory of going to the end of the dock, no memory of standing there, no memory of how long he had been there. His last clear memory was reaching for the fishing rod in the boathouse. At 20 minutes past midnight, something knocked on the cabin door. 3 knocks. Slow, evenly spaced, not urgent, patient. They sat in silence and looked at each other. Priya whispered that it was probably just an animal, a raccoon maybe. Could raccoons knock on doors? She didn't know. She was whispering and her hands were flat on the table in front of her, as if pressing down on something. The knocking came again. 3 knocks, identical to the first set. The same rhythm, the same patient, unhurried spacing. Zachary moved to the window beside the door. He stood to the side of it. "Careful," he said, "not to be seen," and looked out. He later told police that he saw something standing on the front porch of the cabin. He described it as tall, very tall, well over 6 feet. Then, he said it was wet, as if it had come out of the water. He said it stood with its back partially to the window, and what he could see of its posture was wrong. Joints bending in directions that human joints do not bend. He said he watched it for approximately 10 seconds, and then it turned its head toward the window. Not its body, just its head, rotating slowly on its neck, farther than a neck should rotate, and it looked directly at him. Zachary backed away from the window. He told the others what he had seen. They did not open the door. The knocking did not come again. At 4 a.m., when the sky had begun to lighten and the silence outside had held for 3 hours, they loaded everything they could carry into their car and drove away from the lake. They drove 4 hours without stopping. They did not discuss what had happened. Daniel slept in the back seat the entire way, and Priya said later that his sleep looked wrong. Too deep, too still, like a sleep that wasn't entirely natural. The 4 of them lost touch within the year. Priya and Elise drifted apart in the way that friends sometimes do. Zachary moved across the country. Daniel. And this is noted in a follow-up report filed 8 months after the incident at the lake. Daniel was admitted to a psychiatric facility in October of the same year. Following a breakdown, he spent 4 months there. His family was told he had experienced a significant dissociative episode. He never spoke publicly about what happened at the lake. The rental property was removed from the vacation platform later that year. The cabin still exists. It has not been rented since. The locals in the nearest town, a small community roughly 8 miles from Harrow's Cove, the informal name for the area around that lake. Do not discuss the lake willingly. One elderly resident, when asked about it by a journalist some years later, said only, "That water's been wrong since before anyone living can remember. Things come up from the deep sometimes. You don't go near it at night. You never go near it at night." And then he walked away and refused to say another word. Story 3. The account, the 47-day diary of a woman who should have left. What I'm about to share with you is drawn from a diary, a physical diary handwritten, that was found in the possession of a woman named Rachel Harmon after her hospitalization in 2019 in Portland, Oregon. Rachel had been admitted after being found in a state of severe distress in her apartment, following a welfare check requested by her employer after she had missed 3 weeks of work without contact. She was physically unharmed. She was, in the clinical language of her initial evaluation, profoundly dissociated from present reality and presenting with complex post-traumatic symptoms of unclear origin. The diary covered 47 days with her consent, and she did consent because she wanted people to know what had happened to her. I am going to walk you through its contents. Day 1. Moved into the new apartment today. 3rd floor. Nice light. The landlord seems kind. The building is quiet. I think this is going to be good for me. She wrote those words with hope, with the kind of fresh start optimism that comes after a difficult chapter. The kind of optimism that makes you believe new walls and new floors can erase old problems. Day 4. Neighbor across the hall. 3B. Knocked and introduced himself. His name is Thomas. He's in his 50s, very quiet, very polite. He brought me a small plant as a welcome gift. I thought that was nice, old-fashioned, almost. He said the building was very peaceful and that I would be happy here. There was something about the way he said it, something about the steady way he looked at her, that she would later replay in her mind many times, but on day 4 it just felt neighborly, harmless. Day 9. Heard Thomas in the hall very late last night. It must have been 2 or 3 in the morning. I couldn't hear what he was saying. Just his voice, low and continuous, like he was talking to himself or on the phone. It went on for maybe 20 minutes. I thought about opening my door and checking, but I didn't. Not my business. She lay awake after that, listening to the silence that followed his voice, wondering why the quiet felt heavier than the sound had. Day 14. Something strange. I was making dinner and realized I had absolutely no memory of the afternoon. The last thing I remember clearly is eating lunch at noon, and then it was 7 p.m. and I was standing at the stove. Just gone. 4 hours of my day, just gone. I've been stressed lately. I think I was just on autopilot, but it felt strange. It felt like waking up somewhere unexpected. The blank hours, those missing pieces of time, they would become the first real crack in her sense of safety, the first sign that something was quietly taking hold inside her new home. Day 19. It happened again. 3 hours this time. I was reading and then I was standing at my window looking out and the light was completely different. Morning light when it had been afternoon. My book was closed and on the shelf. I don't remember closing it or putting it away. I made an appointment with my doctor. She stared at her own hands that day, wondering how they could have moved without her knowing, wondering what else they might have done during those lost hours. Day 22. Thomas knocked again today. He asked if I had been sleeping well. I said yes, which isn't entirely true. He looked at me in a way that I can only describe as assessing, like he was checking something, like I was a meter he was reading. I don't know why I thought that. He was perfectly pleasant. He brought more food. He keeps bringing food, casseroles and things, always leaving them with a note that says, "Made too much. Hope you enjoy. I've been eating them. They're good." Why does that feel relevant to write down? The food warm, comforting, delivered with such quiet insistence. She would later question every bite she had taken. Day 27. I found a mark on my arm that I don't remember getting. Not a bruise exactly, more like a faint circular indentation. Like something pressed against the skin repeatedly. I can't think of anything that would cause it. I don't want to be dramatic. I'm not going to be dramatic. She traced that mark with her fingers over and over, feeling the slight depression, wondering how long it had been there before she noticed. Day 30. I stopped eating the casseroles 3 days ago. I don't know why exactly. Intuition, since I stopped eating them. The blank hours have mostly stopped. That's probably a coincidence. I am telling myself firmly that it is a coincidence. But deep down, in the quiet moments when the apartment felt too still, she knew it wasn't just coincidence. Day 33. I went through my apartment today with the kind of attention I've never given it before. Checked every vent, every smoke detector, every outlet cover. I found something in the smoke detector in the bedroom. A small device that I didn't recognize, and that was definitely not part of the original detector housing. I took a photograph of it before removing it. I have the photograph. I don't know what the device is. I don't know how it got there. Thomas has the only other key to my apartment besides me and the landlord. She held that device in her palm for a long time, turning it slowly, feeling its wrongness, feeling how something so small could unravel everything. Day 35. I have not been sleeping in the apartment. I've been telling people I have. Texting friends from inside so my phone's location shows me home. Responding to emails as if nothing is different. But I leave every night around 9 p.m. and sleep in my car 2 blocks away. I told myself I was being paranoid. But the idea of being asleep in that apartment, in that bed, under that smoke detector or wherever else he may have put something, I can't do it. I physically cannot make myself lie down in there. The nights in her car were cold and uncomfortable, but they felt safer than the warm bed that now seemed like a trap. Day 39. Thomas knocked today. He knows. I don't know how he knows. But he does. He knocked, and when I opened the door, I made myself open the door. I needed him not to know that I knew. He looked at me, and something in his expression was different, not threatening, almost disappointed. The way a person looks when a plan hasn't gone the way they intended. He asked if I had enjoyed the food. I said yes. He nodded slowly. He said, "You'll adjust." I said, "Sorry?" He said, "To the building, people always do." And then he smiled and said to have a good evening and walked back to his apartment. That smile, that calm, knowing smile, stayed with her long after he left. Day 43. I found a journal entry in my handwriting that I have no memory of writing. It was tucked inside a book I don't remember opening recently. The entry is dated 4 days ago. Says, "In my handwriting, Thomas is right. This is a good building. I feel settled here now. I don't think I'll leave. I did not write this. I know my own mind. I did not write this." Reading those words in her own script felt like betrayal from within, as if part of her had already been taken over. Day 46. Last entry in this building. Tomorrow I'm leaving. I've arranged to stay with my sister. I'm taking only what fits in a bag. I have not told anyone where I'm going. I've been very careful, not to let anything show on my face, not to change my routine in any way he could see. I think he watches the hallway. I think he has something in the hallway too. I know how this sounds. I know what a person reading this might think. I just need you to know. I am not confused. I am not unwell. Something has been done to me in this apartment. I don't fully understand what, but the blank hours, the note in my handwriting, the device in the detector, the food, it all connects. I know it connects. If you're reading this and something like this is happening to you, the disappearing hours, the feeling that you're being observed, the food that someone keeps insisting you eat, please listen to your instincts. Leave. Don't wait to be certain. Leave before you're certain. By the time you're certain, you might not be able to leave. Rachel never made it to her sister's house. She was found in her apartment the following morning. She had no memory of deciding to stay. Thomas, last name unknown, had vacated apartment 3B sometime in the night. The landlord told police he had paid in cash and had provided no verifiable personal information beyond a first name at the time of rental. The device found in Rachel's smoke detector was later identified as a modified inhalant diffuser, a component that, when paired with certain compounds, could be used to introduce substances into a room through the ventilation system. What compound had been used, and what its precise effects were, was never publicly confirmed. Thomas was never found. Rachel spent 4 months recovering. She has since moved to a different city. She checks every smoke detector in every room she sleeps in. He says she always will. Story 4. The Congregation, what investigators found in the hills above Millhaven. This story requires a certain kind of patience from you, because unlike the others, which are the stories of individuals, of ordinary people touched by something extraordinary and terrible, this story is about something that had been building for a very long time, something organized, something patient, something that hid in plain sight for decades. In 2014, a missing persons investigation in a rural community in West Virginia led authorities to a property located in the hills approximately 12 miles east of the town of Millhaven. I'll call it what the local law enforcement came to call it informally during the investigation. The hill property. The investigation had begun with the disappearance of a 19-year-old named Corey. Corey had grown up in Millhaven, had lived there his entire life, had worked at his uncle's hardware store since he was 16. He was, by all accounts from those who knew him, a quiet and grounded young man who was not the type to disappear without a word. He vanished in February. By April, when the ground had thawed and 2 months of searching had produced nothing, his mother filed a missing persons report that she had been filing updates to weekly, a detail that would later be credited with keeping the investigation active when it might otherwise have been closed. The lead investigator on the case, a state detective named Warren, later gave a partial account of what was discovered at the Hill property. I say partial because a significant portion of the investigation's findings remained sealed for years due to an ongoing federal involvement that was never fully explained to the public. What Detective Warren confirmed: the property consisted of a main farmhouse, 2 outbuildings, and a structure he described as a meeting space of some kind, purpose-built, not original to the property. The meeting space was underground, accessible via a concealed entrance in the floor of one of the outbuildings. It was large enough to hold, Warren estimated, between 60 and 80 people. The walls of the underground space were covered in writing. Warren described it as a combination of text and symbol, some of it appearing to be in English, some in what he described as a constructed script or cipher that no one on the team recognized. Interspersed with the text were names, hundreds of names, some with dates beside them, some with what appeared to be notes or annotations. Corey's name was among them. The investigation determined that the congregation, as it came to be informally known, had been active at the Hill property for at least 23 years, based on the earliest dated materials found on site. Membership at its height was estimated at between 40 and 100 individuals, drawn not just from Millhaven but from communities across a wide surrounding region. They were ordinary people. This is something that Warren emphasized when he later spoke carefully about the case. He said it was important to understand that teachers, a nurse, several farmers, a man who had served on the town council, people who attended church on Sunday mornings and helped at local fundraisers and waved at their neighbors, people that no one suspected, people who had been meeting in a hole in the ground for over 2 decades. What exactly the congregation believed, what they practiced in that underground space, remained sealed under the federal involvement mentioned earlier. What was confirmed publicly? Several individuals found or identified in connection with the property were charged with offenses including unlawful detention, conspiracy, and charges related to the handling of human remains. Corey was found alive. He had been held on the property for 62 days. He did not speak publicly about his experience. He moved away from Millhaven within months of his recovery. His mother, when asked by a local journalist whether Corey had said anything about what had happened to him, said only, "He told me enough. He told me what they wanted him to be. He told me what they would have made him if we hadn't found him." She was asked to elaborate. She shook her head. "Some things," she said, "I will not put into the world." 14 individuals connected to the Hill property were ultimately charged. Of those, 11 were convicted. The remaining 3 were never located. The underground meeting space was sealed. The farmhouse was demolished. The land was purchased by the county and left unoccupied. No one has built on it since. Warren retired in 2018. In an interview given after his retirement, he was asked if the Hill property case had changed him. He sat quietly for a moment before answering. "I've worked homicides," he said. "I've worked cases that would stop your heart if I described them, but there's something particular about discovering that ordinary life, normal life, the life all around you, can be a surface over something like that. Something that's been there for 23 years. Right there, and nobody knew." He paused. "I look at people differently now," he said. "Not with suspicion exactly, more like, I don't take the surface for granted anymore. I used to think the surface was the truth. Now I know it's just the surface." Story 5. The Last Tenant. The Final Months of Gerald Finch. I want to tell you about Gerald Finch. Gerald was 67 years old when he moved into the apartment building on Varner Street in Chicago in the autumn of 2020. He was a retired schoolteacher. He had taught 8th grade English for 31 years. He was a widower. His wife had passed 3 years earlier, and he had one adult daughter who lived in Seattle and with whom he spoke every Sunday evening without fail. He was, by every available account, a sharp, warm, sensible man, a skeptic in the good sense of the word, a man who valued evidence, who taught his students to question what they were told, to look for sources, to resist the comfort of easy explanations. He was not the kind of man who believed in ghosts. He moved onto the 4th floor of the Varner Street building and settled into apartment 4A. The building had 7 floors, 22 units. It was mid-century construction, well-maintained. In a quiet part of the north side, his daughter helped him move in. She said later that her father seemed happy that day, tired in the way of people who are physically older but mentally alert. He was excited about the natural light in the apartment. He had already identified where he would put his writing desk, She drove back to the airport that evening. She hugged him goodbye. She spoke to him the following Sunday. The calls continued for 2 months. And then, over the course of the 3rd month, they began to change. Gerald's daughter, her name is Patricia, and she has spoken publicly about this. Said the change was gradual, not dramatic, nothing you could point to in a single conversation and say, that's when it changed. It was more like watching the color slowly leave something, week by week, call by call. Her father began mentioning the upstairs neighbor. Apartment 5, directly above him. He mentioned her first in passing. Referred to her as the woman above. Said she kept late hours. That he sometimes heard her moving around at 2 or 3 in the morning. Patricia thought nothing of it. City living, old buildings, sound carries. The following week, Gerald mentioned that he had seen the upstairs neighbor in the elevator. He described her as a tall woman, very pale. Somewhere between middle-aged and older. He said it was hard to tell. He said she had looked at him in the elevator with an expression he couldn't quite describe. Not unfriendly, not friendly either. Just focused, he said. Like she was studying something. She did not speak to him. He said he felt unsettled after. He laughed about it, though. Said he was getting old and jumpy. Said he needed to get out more. By the 4th week, the tone had changed. Gerald told Patricia that he was having trouble sleeping, that the sounds from above had gotten worse, not louder necessarily, but more present, more deliberate. He said sometimes it sounded like pacing, back and forth, in the same path, over and over, for hours. He had knocked on the ceiling with a broom handle once. The universal language of apartment buildings. The polite but firm request for quiet. The pacing had stopped for approximately 10 minutes, then resumed. Patricia told him to talk to the building manager. He said he already had. The building manager had told him that apartment 5A was vacant. Gerald had the building manager come up and verify this in person. Together they went to 5A and knocked. No answer. The building manager unlocked the door and they looked inside. The apartment was empty. No furniture. No personal items. The carpet was clean. The air was still. There was nothing in any room to suggest recent occupancy. Gerald told Patricia this over the phone, and she heard in his voice something she described as controlled fear. The fear of a sensible person trying to stay sensible in the presence of something they cannot explain. He said, "Patricia, I heard someone up there last night for 4 hours. I lay in my bed and listened to someone walk back and forth above me for 4 hours, and there is no one up there." She told him to call her whenever it happened, day or night. He called her 3 times that week. By the 5th week, Gerald had stopped sleeping in the bedroom. He slept, when he slept at all, on the couch in the living room. He told Patricia that the sounds were worse in the bedroom, directly below where he estimated the pacing originated. He had begun documenting the occurrences, dates, times, duration. He had placed a sheet of paper against the ceiling and traced what he believed was the path of the footsteps. A straight line, approximately 12 feet, walked repeatedly in both directions. He told Patricia that he had begun to feel watched in his apartment, not by the pacing, not by whoever or whatever was upstairs. From inside the apartment, he described a sensation, persistent, impossible to rationalize away, of something present in the corner of certain rooms, not visible, not audible, but undeniably, overwhelmingly present, a feeling of being observed from a vantage point just at the edge of perception. He said he had started leaving lights on at night. He said he had started talking out loud when he was alone, in a normal tone of voice, as if someone were in the room with him. Not because he believed someone was, but because the silence without speech felt unbearable. Patricia asked if he wanted to come and stay with her in Seattle for a while. He said no. He said he wasn't going to let an old building beat him. On a Sunday in February, 5 months after he had moved in, Gerald called Patricia at the usual time. The call was different immediately. His voice was different. Patricia said it was flatter than usual, deliberate, the way a person speaks when they are choosing their words very carefully because they are afraid of what the words mean. He told her that he had found something the night before. The pacing had stopped abruptly at around 1 a.m., stopped mid-step, no gradual quieting, just an immediate silence. He had lain there in the sudden quiet for a long moment, and then, despite everything, despite every rational argument against it, he had gotten up, gone to his front door, opened it, and looked out into the hallway. The hallway was dim. The overhead light on his floor operated on a motion sensor and had gone off, suggesting no one had been in the hall recently. But standing at the far end of the hallway, near the stairwell door, was the woman from 5A. Gerald described her the same way he had before, tall, pale, somewhere between ages. He said she was standing completely still. He said she was looking at him. He said he couldn't see her expression unclearly from that distance. He said hello. She didn't move. He said her name, which he didn't know. He said he must have said something like, "Can I help you? Are you all right?" She didn't answer, and then the hallway light clicked off, triggered by the motion of his opening the door, now timing out, and the hall went dark. He stood there in the darkness. He waited. He didn't move. He heard the stairwell door open and close. Gerald told Patricia all of this in the flat, deliberate voice she had noticed at the start of the call. And then he said, "I know what you're going to say, that it was a person, that she was just a person, a trespasser or a previous tenant or someone who wandered in from outside. And maybe that's true. But Patricia, when I was standing there in the dark, in the time between the light going off and the stairwell door opening and closing, I heard breathing." Patricia said, "Dad, okay?" He said, "I heard breathing, but it wasn't from the direction of the stairwell. It was from directly in front of me, right in front of me, no more than 2 or 3 feet away." He paused, and then the stairwell door opened and closed, from 20 feet away, as if whatever was in front of me moved to the stairwell door and opened it without crossing the distance. Patricia flew to Chicago the following Thursday. She found her father in good physical health but visibly diminished, thinner. The apartment was overlit, every lamp on, every overhead light, the closets open with their lights on too. She contacted the building management and requested they investigate 5A. The building manager let her accompany him. Apartment 5A was, again, empty, but this time, Patricia noticed something on the floor of the living room, in the area roughly corresponding to the path her father had been mapping through his ceiling. The carpet was worn in a narrow path, approximately 12 feet long, worn in both directions, as if something had walked that same path an extraordinary number of times. Gerald moved out of the Varner Street building 10 days later. He went to live with Patricia in Seattle. He never moved back to Chicago. He died 18 months later of a cardiac event. His daughter is careful to clarify that his doctors found no direct connection between his experience at Varner Street and his health decline. and she does not want to imply otherwise. But she says that the man who moved out of that building was different from the man who moved in. Quieter, more watchful, less willing to dismiss things he couldn't explain. He never stopped sleeping with the lights on. Not once in those 18 months. The Varner Street building is still standing. Apartment 4A is currently occupied. Apartment 5A, according to a check of the building's public rental listings as of earlier this year, REMA, is listed as available. 5 stories. 5 ordinary people who woke up one day and found that the world, the safe, knowable, measurable world they had always lived in, was not entirely what they had believed. I want to say something before we end, because I think there's a temptation, after stories like these, to find the explanation, to reach for the rational answer, to say, it was stress, it was pipes, it was a confused intruder, it was a psychological response to grief or isolation or change, and sometimes, often, that's exactly what it is, but sometimes, the evidence doesn't support the comfortable answer. Sometimes, the footprints in the dust don't go back out. Sometimes, the worn carpet in the empty apartment tells a story that comfort cannot accommodate. Sometimes the world is stranger and darker and less in our control than we want it to be. I think about Marie sometimes, about whether she's sleeping well, about whether Caleb, now a teenager, knows what was in his wall when he was 7. I think about Zachary standing at that window in Vermont, watching something turn its head too far in the dark. I think about Rachel writing, in her own handwriting, words that were not her own thoughts. I think about Corey, who will never tell us what those 62 days were. And I think about Gerald, standing in a dark hallway, hearing breathing from 2 feet in front of him, hearing it, and then being very, very still. These are not invented stories. These are not campfire tales or urban legends. These are reports, records, documents. The true horror of the world is not that monsters exist. The true horror is how close they can get before anyone notices. Thank you for listening. This has been at Thescara Collector. Stay careful. Stay watchful. And whatever you hear, I end the walls tonight. Don't open the door.